In the middle of a deadly snowstorm, one veteran and his loyal dog walked into the whiteout, not knowing they were about to change 3 lives forever. A mother searching for her son, an old woman trapped by guilt, and a soldier still haunted by war, all brought together by faith, courage, and a miracle only God could write. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of hope, redemption, and God's grace through life's storms. The storm had already swallowed the forest whole. Snow came down in thick, furious sheets, turning the pine ridges of northern Montana into a white blur where sky and earth became the same endless void. The wind screamed through the trees like something alive, bending the old trunks until they groaned in protest. Inside a small wooden cabin, half buried under drifts, a dim light flickered against the frost-coated windows. Ethan Brooks sat by the wood stove, elbows on his knees, the heat barely touching the cold that lived inside him. He was 45, broad-shouldered but lean, a man built from years of carrying weight that wasn't just physical. His short brown hair was peppered with gray. A rough beard traced the angular lines of his jaw. Scars ran down his forearm, faded reminders of shrapnel that once burned through flesh and bone. His eyes, a steel blue, carried the distance of deserts and the silence of loss. Ethan had served 18 years as a combat medic in Afghanistan before the blast that ended his career. The army patched his body back together, but they couldn't fix the part of him that still woke in the dark to the echo of mortar fire. The cabin was quiet except for the steady breathing of Ranger. The German shepherd lay near the stove, his thick black and tan coat glistening in the firelight. 6 years old, powerful, disciplined, he was the one constant Ethan trusted. Ranger had been trained as a rescue dog, loyal to a fault, but retirement had not dulled his instincts. His ears twitched at every shift of the wind, and now, as another gust slammed into the cabin walls, he lifted his head, eyes bright, muscles coiling under his fur. Ethan glanced up from the mug in his hands. "What is it, boy?" His voice was low, gravelly, shaped by too many years of shouting through chaos. Ranger didn't bark yet. He just stood, nose tilted toward the door, a deep rumble starting in his chest. Ethan frowned. He had learned long ago that Ranger never reacted without reason. Then it came, a faint sound beyond the storm's roar, a distant, drawn-out wail that rose and fell through the blizzard. For a second, Ethan thought it was the wind playing tricks, but Ranger's sudden bark shattered the illusion. It was a siren, somewhere far down in the valley, distorted by the snow. He set his mug down. The handle of the metal cup clinked against the table. The sound was absurdly loud in the silence that followed. His pulse quickened, a reflex older than reason. For months he had tried to stay away from people, to bury himself in solitude and wood smoke. But that sound, the cry of distress, pierced through the walls he'd built. He rose, pulling on his worn parka, the one lined with faded camouflage from another life. His movements were deliberate, efficient. A ritual burned into him by training. Ranger circled by the door, tail stiff, waiting for the command. "Easy," Ethan muttered, though his own breath had already turned sharp. He hesitated by the table, where a small photograph rested under a cracked glass frame. A young medic team, grinning in desert sun. One of them, Jake, was missing half his face in the photo's torn corner. Ethan touched the frame briefly, a silent salute to the man he hadn't saved, then turned toward the storm. When he opened the door, the wind hit like a physical force, slamming into his chest. Snow whipped around him in violent spirals, stinging his skin like glass shards. The world outside was reduced to white noise and motion, a landscape erased. Ranger plunged ahead into it without hesitation, his dark shape cutting through the blur. Ethan followed, each step sinking to his knees. The cold bit through his gloves, through the layers of fabric, until it felt like his blood was freezing. He moved by instinct, head down, flashlight beams swallowed almost instantly by the storm. The siren came again. Closer now, somewhere near the old county road. It wasn't just a police signal, it carried that human edge of panic that no machine could hide. "Come on, Ranger," he shouted above the wind. The dog barked once, a sharp acknowledgement, and took the lead. They descended the narrow trail that wound through the fir trees, every branch heavy with ice. Ethan's breath came out in ragged bursts. The physical pain was almost comforting. It pushed the memories back, kept him focused. In the army, pain meant you were still alive. After half an hour of trudging, the dark outline of the road emerged, half buried under snow. The siren had stopped, replaced by the low hum of an idling engine. Ethan's flashlight cut through the flurries to reveal a small county rescue SUV stuck in a drift, its hazard lights pulsing weakly through the whiteout. Inside, the figure of a woman was struggling with the radio mic, her gloved hands smacking the console in frustration. Ethan approached cautiously, raising a hand. "You all right in there?" he called out. The window rolled down halfway, snow gusting in. The woman looked up, Clara Hayes. She was in her mid-30s, tall and strong-boned, her face framed by strands of dark hair escaping from a knit cap. Her eyes were the color of wet earth, steady, determined, but shadowed by exhaustion. The badge on her chest was half hidden under layers of thermal gear. She was the town's police chief, though Ethan had only ever seen her from a distance at the gas station in the valley. "The road's gone," she shouted back. "Drift took it out. There's an old woman trapped up on Hunter's Ridge. I was trying to reach her house before the plow came through, but—" She gestured to the buried wheels. Ethan moved to the rear, clearing snow from the bumper. "You're not getting this out tonight," he said. His tone carried the calm of someone who had faced worse odds. "Where's the ridge?" "Half a mile north, but it's suicide to go on foot in this." Her breath fogged between them. "I already lost radio contact 10 minutes ago." Ranger barked sharply as if disagreeing. Ethan glanced at him, then back at Clara. "Your choice," he said quietly. "Sit here and freeze, or move while we still can." For a heartbeat, she studied him. The lines etched into his face, the quiet authority behind the calm. Something in that look made her nod. She grabbed her pack, checked the flare gun on her belt, and climbed out. The wind snatched her words, but Ethan caught the edge of gratitude in her voice. They pressed forward, Ranger leading. The ridge loomed like a ghost above the tree line, its path half erased by snowdrifts. Ethan could feel the old pain in his leg flaring with each step, the reminder of shrapnel still lodged near the bone. He gritted his teeth, focusing on the rhythm of movement, the crunch of boots, the hiss of the wind, the occasional low growl from Ranger as he scented something ahead. Halfway up the ridge, the blizzard eased just enough to reveal a faint orange glow, a lantern, swinging wildly in the storm. Ethan's heart kicked. "Someone's there," he said. Clara raised her flashlight, but the beam dissolved into the snow. When they reached the crest, they saw it. A small wooden house perched dangerously close to the cliff edge, one wall partially collapsed under the weight of snow. From inside came a weak, rhythmic knocking, someone trying to draw attention. Clara lunged forward, but Ethan caught her arm. "Careful! The ground's unstable." She shook him off. "That's Martha Hill in there. She's 82. I'm not leaving her." The fierce resolve in her voice was something Ethan recognized. It was the same tone soldiers used when refusing to abandon a comrade. He nodded once. "Then we go together." They crawled the last few yards. The ice cracked beneath them, sending a jolt through Ethan's spine. Ranger moved low to the ground, tail stiff, ears pinned back. When they reached the door, it was half blocked by debris. Ethan braced his shoulder against it, pushing until the frame gave way with a splintering sound. Inside, the air was thick with cold and dust. Mrs. Martha Hill lay near the stove, pinned under a fallen beam. She was frail, her skin pale as parchment, gray hair matted with snow. Her breath came in shallow rasps. "Clara?" she whispered, eyes fluttering open. Clara knelt beside her, voice trembling. "It's okay, ma'am. We've got you." Ethan assessed the beam, too heavy to lift without leverage. He looked around, found a length of broken railing, and wedged it under. "On 3, he said. They lifted together. The beam shifted just enough for him to drag the old woman free. The effort tore at his leg. He almost fell when the pain spiked. But Ranger was there, pressing against him for balance. The warmth of the dog's body steadied him more than he expected. Outside, the wind howled. Again, fiercer than before. The roof creaked ominously. "We can't stay," Ethan said. "We'll move her down to the trees. There's cover there." Clara nodded, helping him wrap Mrs. Hill in a blanket. They stepped into the storm once more, Ethan supporting the old woman's weight, Clara shielding her face from the snow. Ranger trotted ahead, carving a path through the drifts. When they reached the shelter of the trees, Ethan lowered the old woman against a rock and caught his breath. For a moment, none of them spoke. The world was silent, except for the moaning wind and the steady rhythm of Ranger's breathing. Clara looked at Ethan. "Who are you exactly?" He met her gaze, eyes pale in the flashlight's glow. "Just someone who's been where storms never end," he said quietly. Ranger pressed his nose into Ethan's hand, tail thumping once against the snow. And as the wind carried the faint sound of another siren from far below, the signal of an approaching rescue convoy, Ethan felt, for the first time in years, something flicker inside him. Not warmth exactly, but purpose, the fragile beginning of it. The fire in the small shelter was dying, its light reduced to a dull amber pulse against the snow outside. Ethan sat near the flames, his breath forming ghosts in the frigid air. Beside him, Ranger lay curled, his fur dusted with frost. Across from them, Clara Hayes crouched beside the old woman, wrapped in blankets. Martha Hill's breathing was shallow but steady, her frail hands twitching now and then, as if still clinging to something unseen. Outside, the storm had not eased. It had only changed its tone, the howling wind turning into a low, relentless moan that pressed against the trees. Clara looked exhausted. Her cheeks were red from the cold, dark hair plastered to her face, her uniform damp and stiff. Ethan studied her quietly, noticing how her hands trembled, not from cold but from worry. He had seen that look before, the look of someone calculating how much hope was left before the mind broke. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above the wind. "My son, Luke. He's out there somewhere." Ethan lifted his eyes. "How old?" 12, she said, swallowing hard. "He was bringing food to Mrs. Hill before the storm. I told him to stay put at the station, but he—" She stopped, forcing back the tremor in her throat. "He thought he could help. He always thinks he can help." Ranger's ears twitched. The name had triggered something, a search pattern ingrained in his training. He lifted his head, sniffing the air as if he understood. Ethan's gut tightened. If he left before the highway closed, he'd be somewhere between the bridge and the ridge, he said, running through the map in his head. 1/2 mile of forest, open ground, and creeks that'll freeze before dawn. Clara looked up sharply. "You think he's alive?" Ethan met her eyes. "If he found shelter, yes. If not—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The silence said it for him. Mrs. Hill stirred weakly, her voice a rasp. "That boy came before dark. Said he'd return with more firewood." Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy with age but sharp with memory. "He left before the wind turned." Clara's breath caught. "Then he's close." Ethan grabbed his pack and checked his flashlight. "We move now. If the temperature drops another 10 degrees, there won't be tracks left to follow." Clara hesitated, glancing at Martha. "I can't leave her alone." "I'll find him," Ethan said, pulling on his gloves. "You stay, keep the fire alive. If we don't come back in 2 hours, follow the trail we broke earlier. There's a cabin halfway down the ridge." "No." Her tone cut through the wind like glass. "I'm coming with you." She grabbed her rifle and slung it over her shoulder. "He's my son." Ethan saw the defiance in her eyes, the kind born of love and guilt, and knew there was no stopping her. He nodded once. "Then stay close. Ranger will lead." The dog stood, shaking the frost from his coat, muscles rippling under the fur. His breath plumed in the dim light, his amber eyes focused. Ethan clipped the tracking beacon to Ranger's harness, a leftover from his military days, and opened the flap of the tent. The cold hit like a knife. They stepped into the storm, leaving behind the dim glow of safety. The forest loomed ahead, dark silhouettes of trees bending under the weight of snow. Ranger moved in silence, his nose close to the ground, weaving through the drifts with purpose. Every few yards he stopped, sniffed, and continued. Ethan followed with mechanical precision, checking compass bearings, though he knew the dog's instincts were sharper than any tool. Clara kept pace, her flashlight cutting brief tunnels through the white. After 20 minutes, Ranger froze. His tail went rigid, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Ethan crouched beside him. "What is it?" The beam of his light fell on a small red shape half buried in the snow, a backpack. Clara rushed forward, falling to her knees. "It's his," she whispered, brushing the snow away with trembling hands. Inside were energy bars, a flashlight, and a small wool cap. Her breath hitched. He was here. Ethan scanned the slope. The snow was churned up, small footprints leading toward the creek. He went downhill, probably looking for shelter, he said, or firewood, like the old lady said. They followed the tracks until the creek appeared, a frozen ribbon of glass under the moonlight breaking through the clouds. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The surface was fractured near the middle. Something had fallen through recently. Clara's voice trembled. "Oh, God!" Ranger barked once, darting ahead. Ethan sprinted after him, slipping on the ice. The dog stopped at the edge of a snowbank, barking furiously. Ethan dropped to his knees and swept the snow aside. Beneath it, wedged between rocks and branches, was a small figure. "Luke!" Clara's scream tore through the night. She stumbled forward, her hands clawing at the snow until Ethan caught her wrist. "Careful! Don't move him too fast!" The boy was alive, but barely. His lips were blue, his skin pale as the ice around him. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of his mother's voice. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thin and broken. Clara cradled his face, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Ethan pulled off his outer coat and wrapped it around the boy, then reached into his pack for a heat pack. He cracked it, feeling the warmth spread, and tucked it under the layers. "We need to move," he said. "He's hypothermic. If we wait, he won't make it back up." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening again. Together they lifted Luke carefully, Ethan supporting the weight, while Ranger trotted ahead, guiding them back toward the faint glow of the fire in the distance. Every step was agony against the uphill drag, but Clara refused to let go, whispering encouragements through chattering teeth. When they finally reached the clearing, the sky had begun to lighten, a faint silver breaking through the storm clouds. Martha was waiting by the fire, her frail form wrapped in blankets. She gasped when she saw them, then helped as Ethan laid Luke near the heat. Ethan rubbed the boy's arms, checking his pulse. It was weak, but steady. Clara brushed Luke's damp hair back, whispering a prayer of thanks. For the first time that night, Ethan saw the tension leave her shoulders. He sat back, watching mother and son, and felt an unfamiliar warmth crawl into the hollow part of his chest. Ranger leaned against him, tail thumping softly. Outside, the storm finally began to break. The morning light that broke through the thinning storm was gray and hollow, the kind that offered no warmth, only visibility. Ethan Brooks stood outside the temporary shelter, the air sharp enough to burn in his lungs. The storm had quieted, but the danger hadn't passed. The sky was heavy with the kind of silence that comes before another blow. Ranger sniffed the wind, his black and tan fur bristling, eyes locked toward the distant ridge where an old house stood like a ghost against the white horizon. The narrow path that once wound up there was now buried under the wreckage of a snowslide. Behind him, Clara Hayes knelt beside her son. Luke had color back in his cheeks, but still shivered under the blankets. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, exhaustion carved into her face. For the first time, Ethan saw how young she truly was beneath the badge and grit. A mother holding herself together by will alone. Mrs. Martha Hill, the old woman with the delicate translucent skin, stirred weakly by the fire, her breath shallow. The collapse of her house had left her with bruised ribs and a leg wound Ethan had wrapped with makeshift bandages. But the injury was worsening. Infection in weather like this meant death, if not treated soon. Ethan turned toward Clara. "She needs real medical care," he said. "If we wait for the storm to clear completely, she won't last the night." Clara looked toward the ridge, jaw tightening. "That's where the radio tower is. If it's still standing, we might get a signal out." Ethan nodded grimly. "Then we go." He grabbed his pack, checking what gear was left. A coil of frayed climbing rope, a flare gun, 2 heat packs, and an old carabiner set from his military days. Ranger barked once as if volunteering. Ethan crouched, fastening the rope to the dog's harness. "You lead," he said softly. "Find us a way up." Ranger gave a short huff and bounded ahead, his paws cutting sharp prints into the snow. The slope was a monster, steep, slick, and broken by fallen trees. Ethan's boots sank deep with each step, and the wind clawed at his face. Clara followed close behind, breath ragged, determination in every movement. "You don't have to prove anything," Ethan called back, voice carried away by the wind. "You've done enough." She shook her head, eyes fierce. "You don't understand. That woman up there, she's the last family my father had before he died. I can't leave her again." Ethan didn't press further. He recognized that kind of guilt, the kind that anchored itself to the heart like a stone. Ranger led them to a rock outcropping half covered in snow, where a thin ledge zigzagged up the cliff face. Ethan tied the rope around a sturdy pine trunk, tested the knot, and handed the other end to Clara. "Clip in. You slip once, and you don't get a second try." They climbed. Every foot gained was a battle of breath and balance. Snow shifted beneath their boots, sliding in slow sheets down the slope. Ethan went first, Ranger above him, claws finding holds invisible to the human eye. Halfway up, the rope went taut as Clara slipped, her boots scraping the rock. Ethan braced hard, muscles screaming, and the rope held. She gasped, dangling for a moment before regaining footing. "I'm okay," she managed. Ethan only grunted. His leg, the one wounded in Afghanistan, was pulsing with fire, but he forced it to hold. At last, they reached the top. The remains of Martha Hill's house loomed before them, half buried and broken. One side of the roof had caved in, but a faint light flickered beneath the debris, a lantern struggling against the cold. Ranger growled low, then pushed forward, squeezing through a narrow opening. Ethan followed, dropping to his knees inside. The air was stale and heavy with the scent of smoke and dust. Beneath the collapsed beams was a small opening that led down into what had once been the basement. Ranger's whine echoed from below. Ethan shined his flashlight into the dark space. There, movement. A weak voice answered. "Help!" He recognized it instantly. Mrs. Hill, still alive? Ethan turned to Clara. "She's down there. The floor's unstable." He clipped the rope to a cracked beam and lowered himself into the narrow gap. Splinters scraped his gloves as he descended, boots finding uneven ground. Ranger was already at the woman's side, nuzzling her hand. She lay amid debris, a gash on her forehead, her breath shallow. Blood had soaked through the bandages. Her eyes opened as Ethan knelt beside her. "You came back," she whispered. "Couldn't leave you," he said, checking her pulse. It was weak, erratic. He looked around for anything useful. No supplies, only broken wood and a small trunk crushed under a beam. "Ethan," Clara's voice echoed from above. "The structure's shifting. We need to move now." Ethan calculated. If he climbed first and pulled her up, the floor could collapse before she cleared the edge. If he stayed, they'd both be buried when the roof gave in. His hands tightened on the rope. "Ranger," he ordered sharply. The dog stood ready. Ethan tied the line around Martha's torso. "On my count," he said, voice steady though his heart pounded. Clara braced at the top, gloves gripping the rope. "Got it. 1, 2, pull." Ethan lifted as Clara hauled from above. Wood cracked. Dust rained down in choking clouds. For a second, the world narrowed to noise and movement. Martha cried out, pain tearing through her frail frame. Then, light. Clara pulled her clear, collapsing backward with the old woman in her arms. Ethan climbed after them, seconds before the basement gave way entirely with a thunderous crash. He rolled onto the snow, gasping, lungs burning. Ranger pressed against his chest, licking his face as if checking for life. When Ethan finally stood, Clara was kneeling beside Martha, wrapping her tighter in a blanket. The old woman's eyes fluttered open. "You found the light," she whispered weakly. Clara looked at her, confused. "What light?" But Martha only smiled faintly, her words fading. "The one you thought you lost." Ethan looked toward the sky. The clouds had begun to part, revealing the first glimmer of dawn beyond the ridge. For a brief, fragile moment, the storm seemed to pause, to breathe with them. Night settled over the ruined house like a shroud. The storm had finally spent itself, leaving behind a heavy silence that seemed louder than the wind had ever been. Ethan sat near the dim glow of a lantern salvaged from the debris, the flame flickering weakly against the cold walls. His leg throbbed under the bandage he'd wrapped earlier, every heartbeat a dull reminder of limits he refused to admit. Ranger lay at the doorway, motionless except for the twitch of his ears. The dog's golden eyes stayed fixed on the world outside, a sentinel against whatever might still move in the darkness. Clara sat a few feet away, arms wrapped tightly around Luke, who slept pressed against her side. The boy's breathing was steady now, though faint tremors still shook his shoulders. Clara's face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. Exhaustion had carved deep shadows under her eyes. She was staring into the fire, her mind clearly miles away. Ethan recognized that look. It was the same one he had seen in soldiers after the first real firefight. A gaze turned inward, searching for meaning in what was left. Mrs. Martha Hill, fragile but alive, rested on a makeshift cot near the far wall. Her breathing rasped softly, each inhale a battle. She looked impossibly small beneath the blanket, her white hair a halo against the darkness. Her age had not erased the lines of pride and loss etched into her face. Ethan had seen the same expression in the eyes of mothers waiting by field hospitals, the mixture of acceptance and something that refused to die. While checking Martha's pulse, Ethan's hand brushed against a small tin box wedged under a fallen shelf. Curiosity pulled him to open it. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, were old photographs, black and white, edges curled with time. One photo caught the light. A young soldier in uniform, his arm around a smiling woman. The man was tall, dark-haired, with a confident grin that seemed untouched by war. But what froze Ethan wasn't the uniform. It was the name written on the back in faded ink. Daniel Hayes, 1989. He looked at Clara. "You should see this." She frowned, rising stiffly and taking the photo from his hand. Her lips parted slightly, color draining from her face. "That's my father," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "He died in a blizzard when I was a baby. They said he deserted his team during a rescue mission. My mother never forgave him." Ethan glanced at Martha. The old woman's eyes were open now, glinting in the firelight. "He didn't desert," she said quietly, her voice hoarse but sharp as frost. "He saved them." Clara turned, disbelief flashing through her expression. "What do you mean?" Martha struggled to sit up. Ethan helped her, propping her against the wall. She took the photograph in trembling hands. "That storm? It came out of nowhere. Daniel was leading a search for me. My husband had gone missing on the ridge that winter. They told him to turn back when the winds hit, but he wouldn't. He said no one gets left behind." Her voice cracked, and she paused, the weight of memory settling on her shoulders. "He found me near the river bend, half buried. But when he tried to get us both out, the ice gave way. I lived. He didn't." The silence that followed was heavy, only the fire's crackle filling it. Clara's face went pale, her eyes glistening. "All these years," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All these years I thought he ran. Everyone said he was a coward." Martha reached for her hand, her touch light but steady. "He was braver than any of them. He saved my life and gave up his own." Clara's composure shattered. She bowed her head, shoulders shaking in quiet sobs. Luke stirred beside her, but didn't wake, his hand resting against his mother's arm. Ethan turned his gaze away, giving her the dignity of grief. He knew what it meant to live under ghosts, to carry the wrong story for too long. Ranger lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking forward. Ethan noticed the dog's posture change from rest to readiness. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, already reaching for his flashlight. Ranger moved toward the door, nose twitching, tail rigid. The wind had shifted again outside. A deep rumble followed, low, distant, but growing. "Get back from the wall," Ethan ordered quietly. Clara wiped her eyes, confused. "Why?" "Because that's not thunder," he said. The sound grew louder, a rolling crack that came from above the ridge. Then the realization hit him. "Avalanche!" Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. Ethan lunged for the lantern, kicking snow over the fire to smother it. "Grab Luke! Move now!" Clara pulled her son close as Ethan dragged Martha's cot toward the inner wall. A second later, the world exploded in sound. Snow slammed against the outside of the house like a tidal wave, the walls shaking, dust raining from the beams. The roof groaned, timbers bending, but miraculously holding. When the noise finally faded, the house was half buried again, the windows opaque with packed snow. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ethan's chest heaved, his pulse thundering in his ears. Ranger pressed against his leg, tail low but steady, breathing hard. Clara held Luke, her eyes wide with fear but alive. Martha coughed, the sound thin but defiant. "The mountain still remembers," she rasped. Ethan exhaled, his body trembling from the adrenaline. He glanced at Clara, who met his eyes, exhausted but resolute. Between them was something unspoken, something forged in shared survival and the truth they had unearthed. Outside, the storm's echo was gone. Only the quiet remained, the kind that comes after a confession, after a wound is finally exposed to the light. Dawn crept slowly over the mountains, turning the white wasteland of snow into a vast ocean of silver. Ethan Brooks stood in the doorway of the broken house, his breath rising like smoke in the cold air. The long night had left him hollow, his muscles trembling from exhaustion, his wounded legs stiff and numb. But his eyes remained clear, locked on the pale horizon where the distant thump of helicopter blades began to echo through the valley. It was a sound he knew well, one that, in other winters and other wars, had meant salvation and farewell all at once. Ranger barked once, a deep, sharp sound of recognition. The German shepherd, his coat matted with frost and soot, stood alert beside Ethan, tail wagging faintly. His eyes gleamed in the new light as if he too understood what that sound meant. Clara Hayes appeared beside them, her hair unkempt, her parka torn at one sleeve, face pale from fatigue, but illuminated by fierce resolve. She looked skyward, shading her eyes against the glare of the sun breaking through the thinning clouds. "They're here," she breathed. The rescue helicopter circled once, a red and white bird against the snowbound cliffs before lowering toward the ridge. The downdraft from its blades sent waves of snow spiraling upward. Ethan shielded his face, shouting instructions to the crew as two figures descended on harnesses. The lead rescuer, a tall man named Caleb Norris, was in his late 30s, with weathered skin and a thick beard that couldn't quite hide the lines of exhaustion beneath his eyes. His parka bore the emblem of the Montana Air Rescue Division. Norris was a man who carried calm like a weapon, steady, disciplined, shaped by years of flying into disasters when everyone else was fleeing. His partner, a younger medic named Harper Lynn, was quick and focused, her small frame moving with surprising strength as she carried her gear through the drifts. She had almond skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing, her black hair tied tightly under her helmet. Two survivors inside, one child, one elderly. Ethan shouted over the roar, his voice cracked with fatigue. "They're stable but weak." Norris gave a short nod, his movements efficient. "We'll extract the civilians first." Harper moved past Ethan into the ruined house, her voice low and reassuring as she checked on Luke and Mrs. Hill. The boy stirred, blinking against the harsh light, and Clara dropped to her knees beside him, relief flooding her face. "You did good, Luke," she whispered. "You held on." Ethan leaned heavily on the doorframe, watching as the rescuers worked. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to help, to carry weight until it was done. But when Norris turned to him, his expression softened. "You look like hell, soldier." Ethan managed a wry smile. "Feels about right." "Name's Norris. You Army?" "Was," Ethan said simply. "Medic. Long time ago." Norris clapped him on the shoulder, a silent acknowledgement between men who didn't need more words. "Appreciate what you did here. You saved 3 lives in a place most wouldn't last an hour." Ethan glanced at Ranger, who was sitting beside Clara and Luke now, tail thumping weakly. "Didn't do it alone," he said quietly. Within minutes, the rescue line lifted Martha Hill first. The old woman's frail body was wrapped securely in a thermal blanket, her face pale but peaceful as the wind from the rotors whipped her silver hair. She looked down once as she rose, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Luke followed next, clutching a small stuffed dog Clara had pressed into his hands for comfort. Ethan watched them vanish into the belly of the helicopter, their silhouettes swallowed by light. When the harness returned, Clara turned to Ethan. "You first." He shook his head. "Not a chance." He knelt, cupping Ranger's muzzle in both hands. "You go, buddy." The dog tilted his head, ears twitching at the sound of the blades. Ethan clipped the harness around Ranger's torso, whispering something only the dog could hear. Ranger barked once, the sound almost like protest, before the line lifted him smoothly into the air. Only then did Ethan allow himself to breathe. Clara stood beside him, snow swirling around them. "You could have gone home on that chopper," she said. He glanced at her. "Home's not a place anymore. It's a purpose." The second helicopter arrived an hour later, carrying medics and engineers. By then, Ethan and Clara had built a small fire outside what was left of the ridge house. The morning sun burned away the last of the storm clouds, turning the snow into blinding brilliance. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. When the rescue team took off with Luke and Martha, Clara remained behind until the last shadow of the helicopter disappeared. She turned to Ethan, voice hoarse. "You don't plan on disappearing again, do you?" He smiled faintly, lines deepening around his eyes. "That depends. You offering something to stay for?" Months later, when the mountain thawed and the first spring melt filled the creeks, a small wooden sign appeared outside a rebuilt cabin near the ridge. It read, "Rangers Haven, Rescue and Rehabilitation Center." Inside, the air was filled with the sound of dogs barking, rescues, trainees, and therapy companions for veterans and lost souls alike. Ethan moved easily among them, his limp less pronounced now, his voice calm and patient. Ranger, stronger than ever, trotted beside him, tail wagging proudly. Clara often visited with Luke, helping him train a young pup. The boy's laughter, bright and unrestrained, filled the yard. One morning, as the first light broke over the valley, Ethan stood outside with a mug of coffee, watching the sun rise through the mist. Ranger ran circles around Luke, barking joyfully as the child threw a snowball. Clara stepped up beside Ethan, smiling softly. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe storms don't destroy things? They just uncover what's worth saving?" Ethan's gaze followed Ranger and Luke, and for the first time in years, the smile that reached his face was unguarded. "Yeah," he said, "I think I finally understand that." The light grew stronger, reflecting off the snow until everything shone with quiet brilliance. For Ethan Brooks, for Clara and Luke, and for one old dog who had never stopped believing, the storm had finally passed, and the world was new again. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm. He walks beside us through it. The snow, the silence, the pain, all of it can be a test, not a punishment. What Ethan, Clara, Luke, and Ranger found wasn't just survival, it was grace. It was the quiet miracle that happens when faith meets courage, when we choose compassion over fear, and when we remember that even in our loneliest winters, God still sends help. Sometimes in the form of a stranger, sometimes in the loyal eyes of a dog. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to thank God for the light He places in your life, the people, the moments, and the second chances that remind you He's still listening. Share this video with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment about what part of the story spoke to your soul, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about faith, redemption, and the miracles hidden in everyday life. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He give you the strength to face your storms, the grace to forgive, and the faith to believe that no night lasts forever.